this. So in thinking about today's webinar, I wanted to highlight the work that goes on after voting. Right now, the Minnesota legislature is in session and local elected councils and boards meet weekly or monthly to make decisions and pass laws. Just because election season is over doesn't mean your voice is no longer heard. Our speakers today will walk us through different ways and times to communicate with your elected officials. Part of that is knowing how bills become laws or how committee meetings work. For some of you, this will be a refresher, but for others, this might be new information. I'd like to welcome Emma Rage from Common Cause and Amy Cowcutt from the League of Women Voters, Minnesota. Emma is the Policy and Civic Engagement Manager at Common Cause, and since graduating from the University of Minnesota, Emma has spent her career in advocacy, including with Fair Vote and Copal, Minnesota, which are also people that we've worked with and great partners. Amy Cowcutt is a longtime member of the League of Women Voters Rochester. Now retired, Amy spent many years as a lobbyist for Olmsted County. Amy is also involved with the League of Women Voters Minnesota Observer and Lobby Corps, and we appreciate her always bringing her experience. So we are so grateful for your time today. We are going to start with Emma.
Thanks, y'all. I actually just have to change something in my space real quick and I will share screen. Sorry for the delay.
It's okay. Thank you so much. So I was wanting to share too, one of the reasons I thought about this is because some people get nervous about communicating with legislative and other elected officials. So I'm hoping that this will also encourage you to reach out if you get a little nervous, which I do. I think you're ready, Emma.
I am. Thank you. Okay. Awesome. So like Heidi mentioned, my name is Emma Rage. I use she, her pronouns. I am the Policy and Civic Engagement Manager at Common Cause Minnesota. And the presentation I'm going to take y'all through this evening is what we call our Civics in Action presentation. And it is what we usually give to students and young folks who are interested in getting involved in the legislative process and learning more about how our legislative process works. I'm going to start off with an overview of who we are at Common Cause and the work that we do. I'll talk briefly as well about redistricting. For us at Common Cause, we view redistricting as really the center of how all of the other democracy work that we do happens. So want to make sure I mention that quick. And then from there, I will get into the actual like Civics 101. So at Common Cause, we are a nonpartisan grassroots organization, and we are dedicated to upholding the core values of American democracy. So for us, that means we work to create an open, honest, and accountable government that serves public interest, promotes equal rights, opportunity, and representation for all, and we work diligently to empower all people to make their voices heard in the political process. So as you can see, we kind of have several different areas where we work in, and like I mentioned, I'll be emphasizing our redistricting and representation reform area shortly. And as I'm talking about how bills become law and how we can be effective advocates on the Capitol campus, I always like to ask folks to think to themselves, who are the stakeholders and decision makers we need to interact with, and how do these people become the stakeholders and decision makers? And the way that many of these people do become the ones that we need to work with, or at Common Cause, one of the big things we say, holding power accountable, the way that these people become the power we need to hold accountable is through redistricting. So redistricting, and please feel free to drop questions in the chat. I'll try to pull the chat box up too, or Heidi, if anything comes up, feel free to stop me. Redistricting can get very wonky, so please, yeah, stop me whenever if there's any questions. But a snapshot, basically redistricting is the process in which our election maps are drawn. And this is done by using census data. And that census data informs how to shift voting lines and boundaries to correspond with the population data. So redistricting affects all levels of our government, from our city council up to our US House representatives. And this process happens every 10 years after the census. So it'll happen again about 6 years after the 2030 census. And overall redistricting is how Minnesota's political voice and power is distributed both on a national scale at the US House of Representatives, but also at the state and local level. Right now in Minnesota, we are operating under maps that use demographics from about 60 years ago. And so in Minnesota, the process for us, the legislature oversees the creation of maps. They work together to pass bipartisan maps. If they are unable to do that, then it'll go to the courts, which is what has been happening. Once it's at the courts, they have a limited role and they have to draw our voting maps under, it's called least change. So because the legislature has failed to move bipartisan maps, we have been left with least change maps for the last 60 years. Our communities in Minnesota do not look the same that they used to 60 years ago. And so that is resulting in some maps that aren't really reflective of the electorate in the area or communities in the area. And then just real quick for the actual kind of like wonky process. So the legislature will adopt the district lines by a simple majority vote in each chamber. And I'll go over what that kind of looks like in our legislative process shortly. And then if the legislature, like I mentioned, fails to move those bipartisan maps, or if someone sues, or if the governor vetoes, then the Supreme Court, that's when they get involved and they'll do those least change maps. And how and where districts are drawn really does determine if your community is able to elect the truly preferred representative. So whether that's on your city council or in your in the state legislature or in Congress, it also really influences whether your elected officials are going to respond to your needs. So if your elected official is going to be reelected no matter what, because of the way that their district line is drawn, they are less inclined to have to listen to you about certain issues, right? So that's why a lot of times we see things like common sense reforms, like gun reforms, for example, don't get passed because there isn't a need to listen to the electorate because people are going to get reelected anyways if they would like to be. And it literally will set up a system of redistricting sets up the system of either voters selecting candidates or political parties or special interests selecting the voters. And because of that, it sets out our entire voting maps. Okay, Heidi, were there any questions about that very top line run through of redistricting?
Not yet, but I love
Okay.
the idea of the reminder of making sure we remember who are the stakeholders and then how do we hold people accountable too. So thank you for sharing that.
Awesome. All right. So now jumping into actual Civics 101. This is, again, really intended to meet folks where they're at. So I like to always encourage questions. I never want anyone to feel like they can't ask anything. All questions are great questions. And before I jump into the actual legislative session and what a bill life cycle looks like, I want to go over what our legislative body looks like. So in Minnesota, we have three bodies that make up our legislative branch: the House of Representatives, the Senate, and the governor's office. So in the House of Reps, we have 100, currently we have 134 representatives. All of those districts are going to be denoted by A or B. So for example, there's a House District 23A and 23B. And if you see a representative's name, for example, Representative Purcell, right? It'll say A or B next to her district name, and that's how you know that she's a representative. For a bill to pass out of the House, it needs 68 votes, and representatives are elected for a 2-year term. So they'll be up for re-election this November. And our Senate is made up of 67 senators. 34 votes are needed to pass a bill, and senators are elected for 4-year terms. And then last but not least, we have our governor's office. They have one governor and one lieutenant governor. They are elected together for a 4-year term. And then within all of these bodies, we also have leadership structures. So in the House, we have our speaker, and then the majority leader and assistant leaders, and minority leaders and assistant leaders. The Speaker of the House is officially elected by members of the entire House on the opening day of session. And the majority leaders and assistant leaders are elected by the majority caucus or party. And then the same process goes for the minority leaders and assistant leaders. In the Senate, we have a majority leader, a minority leader, and a president of the Senate, plus all of the assistant majority and minority leaders. And in the governor's office, we have state agencies and the governor's cabinet. So currently the governor's office oversees over 45 state agencies and has 24 members within their cabinet. This year, our legislative session is running from February 12th to May 20th. The dates for the legislative session are outlined in the Constitution. So if you're ever wondering how to predict what dates they will be picking, you can find that info in the Constitution. I also want to note too, our legislature runs on a biennium, right? So for like the 2 years, so we're in the second year of our biennium right now. And the first year of the biennium and the second year of the biennium look a little different. For example, last year, right, a lot of more social facing issues were bills that were worked on and passed. And this year you'll see a lot of talk about like bonding or financial things to do with financial bills. And then before I get into the technical process of how a bill becomes law, again, I want to note a question for all of us to ask ourselves about where do bill ideas come from? So bill ideas really do come from all over the place. It can be from lobbyists, from special interests, it can be from nonprofits like the League or Common Cause. And a bill idea can also come from constituents. So I always love to encourage folks that you meeting with your elected officials about the issues that you care about really can influence an elected official's desire to create a bill or work on a specific issue. All right, so now to get a little technical. Step one, a bill must be introduced. So this can happen in either the House or the Senate. There's going to be the first reading on the floor of the originating chamber. So if our bill starts in the House, the originating chamber is going to be the House. And then it'll get assigned to committee. After the first reading reading and committee assignment is completed, then the committee work is done. And during the portion of this portion of the bill's life cycle, committee members will do a variety of things. So they're going to vote on basically if more work on the bill is necessary, right? So they might refer it to an additional committee. And then also important to note, there are a couple of committees that that the bill is going to go through. Has to go through Ways and Means, and then there's one more committee that I'll talk about in just a second. But I do want to note the committee process or the committee portion of the bill's life cycle is really a great place to be getting involved. This is where a lot of the public meetings are happening. This is where you might get asked to show up to show support or rally against a bill as during a hearing. And then also, right, there's opportunities to submit written testimony, or if you're wanting to go in person and speak, you can do oral testimony. Sometimes they do testimony via Zoom as well. So this portion is definitely huge for getting involved and being active with the legislation that's being moved at our Capitol. Once all of the initial hearings or committee hearings have been completed, the bill is going to get referred to the Rules Committee, and that's where they're really going to decide if the bill is ready for a floor debate. And then from there, the bill is going to get placed on the general calendar for floor debate and a vote. So if the bill passes, then this process is going to repeat in the chamber where it didn't originate. So earlier I said our originating chamber for our bill is the House. If we did this entire process in the House, we passed on the floor vote, it has to happen again in the Senate. And then once the bill is voted on by the second chamber and passed by the second chamber, there's a couple different paths. So either A, the bill is going to get referred back to the original chamber to complete what's called the concurrence process. This only happens if the bill has been passed with amendments. So the bill passes in the House and is passed in the Senate with amendments, then the bill will be sent back to the House for concurrence. And that means that the House is going to have to work to adopt those same amendments so that the bill passed by each chamber matches completely. So even if it's like taking out a comma, they have to go back and make sure that everything is exactly the same. And then option B is the second chamber passes it with no amendments, and then the bill just goes straight to the governor's office. At the governor's office, the governor can either veto or approve the bill. If the governor vetoes, then the bill will not become law and did not pass out of our legislative body. And if the governor approves, then they will sign the bill and it will be sign the bill into law and it will be enacted. So I think the big example I think the biggest one from last year of something being vetoed was the Uber Lyft bill, just so y'all can get a picture of what it looks like when a bill is vetoed. And then now that we're all a little bit more familiar with the process, I would love to put some faces to the names about the positions I've talked about. So I'm going to drop a link in the chat in just a second, but it's where you can look up who, there you go, who represents you. So you'll just enter the address requirements and then you can see your elected officials. This is a great place, one, to just see who it is. And then also from there, you can get all their contact info. So encourage y'all to write emails or make phone calls to the offices about, even if it's just, if you care about environmental issues, hey, what is the representative doing to work on environmental issues this session? Or where do they stand on these environmental bills that are happening this session, right? And now that theoretically, once y'all look things up or look up your elected officials, or if you already know, I'd love to talk about what we do at the Capitol. And this is specifically for Common Cause. It looks similar, but also different for other orgs, depending on what they are looking to do. But if you're on any phone or email or text lists, I am sure that you're familiar with organizations asking you to participate in actions at the Capitol. And for us at Common Cause, they usually fit into these three categories. So holding power accountable, ensuring our voices are heard, and showing support. And some frequent activities and actions you might see at the Capitol or might be asked to participate in, or maybe you want to organize yourself, are rallies, testifying at hearings, like I mentioned during the committee process, looking up the phone numbers for those elected officials that you hopefully just looked up on the LCC website. Even attending hearings, if you're just going to listen, right? Showing elected officials that you are paying attention to what they are working on is definitely impactful. And then also, right, meeting with your elected officials to discuss issues. All right. So there are a couple different ways that reforms get moved through our legislative body in Minnesota. In the news, you might hear a lot about reforms or work being done specifically via ballot measures. In Minnesota, we can do ballot measures at the city level. So for example, there have been ballot measure questions in Minneapolis regards to like police funding, and in St. Paul, you might have seen a ballot measure regarding rent stabilization. We cannot do that at the state level though. So instead of a ballot measure, we have to do constitutional amendments. And they're moved just like any other bill. So they'll go through that exact process that we just went over in that flow chart. And then the legislature will require a simple majority vote from each chamber to put a question on the ballot about a constitutional amendment. And then in order for that to become law, the question is going to have to get the majority of all voters to vote yes or no on the ballot question. And that's not a majority of the voters that went out and voted. That's a majority of all the voters that are in the state of Minnesota. And for us, mostly a great way to tell if it's going to be a constitutional amendment question is it'll start with, shall the Minnesota Constitution be amended to provide, and then say what the issue is, and then it'll ask you to vote yes or no. A pretty major example is the Minnesota marriage amendment. I think that was 2012. So you might have seen like bumper stickers or signs or t-shirts like vote yes or vote no, and then the actual ballot folks voted yes or no. And the reason that some of our laws have to be voted on as a constitutional amendment and some that just need to be passed as bills is that laws that are being proposed to change our constitution need to be put on the ballot for voters to approve. And then the other way we just talked about is just the standard bill cycle. I know I've just thrown a lot of information at you, and it's a lot to digest and remember. So I have some resources. I'll drop them in the chat. I'll send them to Heidi too, for y'all to refer back to. if you would like, I have our legislation and government one pager. It has a breakdown of our different branches of government and how they all interact, and then also that the legislative process diagram that I just went through with y'all. And then I also have one just about the work we do at Common Cause and info about redistricting. Refer back to like that snapshot that I gave at the beginning. And then, yeah, if you want to follow us on socials, our executive director always has some fun tweets going on during sessions, so highly recommend. She keeps us up to date. Our website too has great info. Our maps is about our redistricting work. And then here's my contact info too. So if anything comes up, please feel free to shoot me an email.
Well, thank you so much, Emma. And we'll take some more questions at the end, and I've written down about 6. So this is great. I do want to say before we pass it off to Amy, one of my favorite constitutional amendments that I just learned about, and we were honoring the 40th anniversary of the constitutional amendment in Minnesota for the Court of Appeals. And that was a constitutional amendment that people had to vote on, and hearing about the campaign and everything, it was super interesting. I also love that because one of the first judges on the Court of Appeals was my neighbor, so I'm a little biased. So thank you so much for that, and we'll pass it on to Amy, who was a registered lobbyist, and will share some more information with us about communicating with our elected officials.
And I see Marcia Cheney there, and I know that she's taught these classes for high school kids, and she always brings candy to throw, and I know I can't do that here. So I hope I can keep you interested, even though I don't have candy to throw out for right answers. But first, I want to start with the question of how many of you have spent time at the Capitol? A couple of you, okay. Well, when I got this job, which I held for 29 years of being the lobbyist for Olmsted County up at our state capitol, I had never been in the state capitol, but I thought I knew how a bill became a law because I'd been in the League of Women Voters, I'd been in local government, I'd worked on campaigns, I knew all the issues locally, but I realized, my gosh, I've never been up there. So when I first got hired at the end of 1989, I made an appointment to meet with the Association of Minnesota Counties chief lobbyist, and I came up, and their office is right across the street from the League of Women Voters. And I said, Pat, I have to admit, I did not admit when I was being interviewed for this job that I have never been in the Capitol, so I'm not exactly sure how to do this job. She said, don't worry, it's a piece of cake. This is a job you learn by doing. That's one thing I want you to take away right now. It is everybody can do it. Anybody can do it. And you get better by doing it. So put that down. You can all be a lobbyist. Don't think that you have to wear Gucci shoes and carry a briefcase and get a 6 number paycheck. So anybody can do it. Here's what she said. Here's what you need to know. Where to park. You're a member of the league. You can park at the league parking lot. So check one thing. Second thing she says, you need to know where the bathrooms are. She showed me where the bathrooms are. Then she said, the next thing to know is it all happens in 3 buildings and they're connected by a subway. And unlike at the Capitol in Washington, D.C., they have to be there. If you watch CNN and they show you Congress, there's one person speaking and no one's there. Wrong about the state of Minnesota. You have to be there. In fact, if you're not there for votes, at the end of the session, there are requests from people who've missed like 14 minutes to go out and have their picture taken with the high school basketball team, and they request permission to be gone. And I've never heard anybody say no, but they have to be there, which is a boon to lobbyists. You can catch these people. So during session, they have to be there. Now with what happened with COVID and some people who are ill, who are still using the Zoom connection, that's maybe not quite so accurate, but almost every one of them has to be there. So she showed me it has to all happen in 3 buildings. You can park here. You can, here's the bathrooms. And then she said where to get the free stuff. Now, you all don't have to worry about that because you live in the age of electronic things. All you have to know is Google Minnesota Legislature and you can get all the free stuff. One of the best free stuff things is this little green book. I always carry it in my purse. It has the pictures of all these people who unfortunately do not wear name tags. So you don't know who they are when they're passing in the hall. You don't know if it's somebody that you need to grab to talk on an issue, but you can look them up. So this little thing is handy. And of course, if you're sitting at your computer, you can look it up that way. The free stuff is what's handed out at the House Information and the Senate Information offices, which are right next to the chambers on the second floor of the Capitol building. And that's where you can get copies of bills. You can get copies of what's coming up on the floor. You can get copies of calendars. But now that you are all electronically connected, you can get that at home. You don't have to be at the Capitol to get that. The best thing about stopping in those information offices, though, you get to know the staff and they sometimes tell you things. It's always important to know all these legislators, but sometimes you learn more from their LAs, their legislative assistants. If you can't find them, the legislative assistant will say, well, they're in such and such a committee because they have a bill that's in that committee. And they'll be coming out soon. So I bet if you go down to room 104, whatever it is, you can meet them. And so then you get your chance, even if you didn't make an appointment, to walk with them to their next place. And so you have to have your quick little announcement. So I want you to know that that's the most important thing is anybody can do it. You know where the bathrooms are, you know where the free stuff is, you know that they're all in 3 buildings. And then the final thing she said, you need to know where your own legislators live. Now that's most important. If you're lobbying for a county, you need to know where your 4 or 6 legislators are going to carry all your bills. And for you, if you are lobbying on youth issues or if you're lobbying on the environment, you need to know where the people who are going to carry those bills live. And the Senate is all in the Senate building. Surprise, surprise, that's where theirs are. And the House members are in what's lovingly called the SOB for State Office Building. And what I don't quite understand, but it's been true for the 25 years I've been watching, the majority party is always the top 2.5 floors, and the minority party is the lower floors. And the same is true in the Senate. So when the majority changes, they all have to close up their offices and move around. So if you really want to talk to the majority party, they're way up on the top floors. And I guess that just means you'll lose weight because you're running up and down the stairs. Okay, so anyone can play. The second takeaway you need to know is this is a team sport. How many times have you heard people say, I vote for the man or I vote for the person. I don't like all this party bickering. I don't like these party labels. Well, try to imagine that what you're seeing, it's not a drama. It's not not just the 201 biggest egos of the state in a sheltered workshop. What you are watching is like a football game. And the majority party always has the ball. And so, yes, how a bill becomes a law, it was everything that you were seeing from Emma. But that's like explaining the rules of football. What it doesn't explain to you is what are the plays. The people in the minority can, of course, do interceptions and recover fumbles if the majority party messes up. But the majority party has to figure out a way to stay together and move the balls that they want to accomplish down and score some points. And so to think of all these legislators who, like I say, are the 201 biggest egos in the state, to see how difficult it is to manage for the majority, the leadership, to keep them working as a team, because all of them have ideas of what they want to do. The majority leadership at the beginning of sessions tries to get down, here are the 5 or 10 things we have to do, here's the budget. And then they try to find gentle or not so gentle ways to keep their own people in line to get this stuff accomplished. And it's a little bit difficult because if you think in football, there are always some hot dogs that want to do little stunts. That happens in the majority party too. And you start watching, and that gets messy. Also, if you think like a football game, there are periods in a football game that are kind of at a lull. And then there are periods when you're at the 2-minute warning and everything is like right now. If you happen to go over to the Capitol this week, think of it as the 2-minute warning. They are running around with their heads cut off because this is sweeps week. If they do not get the bills that they have been, it's their lifeblood. Every single one of these 201 people got elected because they wanted to make a difference. And here is the bill of their life. And it hasn't had enough hearings. And if it has not had all the hearings required by Friday, it is dead, dead, dead. So they're running around to get that done. This is probably not a good week to go and contact your legislator about some kind of different thing that's happening at home. Like if your this legislator is up to their neck working on redistricting, they probably do not want to hear about an environmental issue that is probably not moving, and they really don't want to spend 15 minutes chatting about things back home before you get into the meat of your presentation. So you need to know the timing. A story about that is my son, who said he would never, ever vote for Sheila Cascaden again because she had stood him up. He had an appointment to see her the last week of the session, and he was at the University of Minnesota Medical School, and all the kids in the medical school were wearing their white coats. They were over there lobbying for, and he had an appointment with Sheila Cascaden, his senator, and sorry, she couldn't meet with them. Well, it was sweeps week, and she mattered. She was the chairman of the State Department's bill. She was in a conference committee. If he had spent 2 minutes with her, walking with her, I mean, not sitting in her office, she doesn't have time for that, walking with her to her conference committee, it would have mattered more what he said to her because she was in a position of power. She was like one of the quarterbacks. But instead, he was pouting because she couldn't meet with him for 15 minutes to chat about the University of Minnesota funding for the medical school. But he did find that Senator Kenrick Scable, who is a member of the minority, had an hour to spend with him and his co-students. And he just loved this guy. I said, but what difference did it make? The guy's in the minority. Whatever he thinks, I mean, you change his mind, so what? His vote doesn't matter. Well, that's something to remember, is if the people that matter are busy. You can't always get a 15-minute appointment, except maybe early in the session. So even getting to talk for 5 minutes, knowing the legislative assistants, knowing other lobbyists so that you know where these people are, they always have to come onto the House or the Senate floor. You can plant yourself right outside those doors, and as they are trying to get in to vote, you can waylay them for 10 seconds. Or you can call them off the floor by simply writing a note and sending it in. And many will come out because if their bill isn't up, sitting on the House or Senate floor can be boring. And if you don't believe it, watch their faces when the video is on. Half of them are sitting at their computers, not paying one bit of attention because they don't care about this bill, or it's another long diatribe by a minority member who's just trying to take up time. So the two things to remember are anyone can play this game, and it's a team sport, and view it as a team sport. How a bill becomes a law, and you had this wonderful presentation from Emma on the outline of how it works, but I want you to think of it not just in that structure, but when actually Sheila Cascaden gave us this talk, and she said, she calls it the 4 Ps of how a bill becomes a law. There's policy. That's what League cares about. You know, you think, of course, this environmental bill should pass. Who would be against doing something for the environment. You'd be surprised. There are more people, more sides on any issue than you can ever imagine. But policy is one. The second one is process. If you think about one of the things I think that the majority, not the majority leader, the speaker did this year is to start the session late. That jams the process so that all of the members of her own party who want to do those stunts, who have great ideas that aren't quite rising to the top for the whole group, they don't have much time because this is deadline. They started on the 15th or 12th of February, already the deadline. That you know, you can win with process. Then remember partisanships, since it's a team sport. There are times when your member will have to vote for something that they can't stand because it's part of a bigger grouping of issues, because it will be a required vote by your team. And if you want your little bill to get through, you better be a team player. Finally, something I surely didn't realize is personalities. Guess what? These people with big egos have personalities. Sometimes I would ask myself, why in the world is that person voting that way? That person is from a district that should be pro-labor. Well, then someone will whisper to me and they'll say, but take a look at who the author is. They can't stand that person. That person stabbed them in the back on the little local bill they were trying to do last session, and that person will never get this person's vote. So personalities are there. There's also a few other things like publicity and power, but really policy, process, partisanship, and personalities. And finally, just want you to see the lesson of the yardstick. This Win Borden, who is a great lobbyist for the Chamber of Commerce, and who, if you're going to do this work, whether it's work of the heart or work for pay, if you do it for more than 1 year, you have to think of it as a long-term investment in getting to know these people, many of whom are there for decades, who are legislators. And what you would like is to have a whole bunch down at this end at 36. They are your champions. They're the people who are going to carry the bill for you. All you have to do as the lobbyist is give them information and they will do all the work. Lucky to have 1 or 2 people like this. I was lucky to have a few from my own community who always carried my local bills. Then there's some people down in here who will support your bill, maybe because of the policy, or maybe personalities. Maybe they're friends with the person who's carrying this bill. So they're in here, and you want to just be sure that you give them information so that they can help your champions. Then there's the people in the middle, maybe at about 18. You hope they'll vote for you, but they could go either way. So you want to give them, make sure that they have any information that they need. You might ask some of these people who are their friends to talk to them if they're willing to do that. Then there's the people down here. They're probably leaning against you for some reason or another. You can give them information and maybe you can move them up, but they might still not vote for you. What you hope is that they just won't try to convince others to vote against you. You just hope that they'll be quiet anti-votes. Then there's the ones down here that you can't even hope for that. You just hope that this is a small number. Sometimes the people here you can get to take a walk when the vote comes up and not be there at all. They are negative, but maybe they like your champion enough that they will leave the room, so at least they won't be an anti-vote. But your job is to move people along this line. And to remember, you are playing a football game with the team that's the majority party, that they're supposed to be in teamwork, and that if you try to work with a minority person, all you can ever hope for is a fumble or an interception. You need to work with the majority. They're the ones that get stuff done. So I hope I see you up there and get your little green book, get the free stuff off the internet, and anybody can do this. And if you really get into it, you know, you think it's all excitement, half the time you don't know what's going on. One of my best friend lobbyist who knew so much once said what the job of the lobbyist is: long hours of boredom interspersed with a few moments of sheer terror. You know, when something is going down that you didn't know was happening, what are you going to do about it? But you can all do this. We can all be effective. And I'm sorry I didn't have any candy to throw. But remember the 4 Ps. Remember, it's a game. And remember, anybody can play. And remember the ruler or the yardstick. So
Well, thank
that's
you.
all I have to say.
Thank you so much, Amy. That was absolutely perfect timing as well. But before I stop recording, I did want to clarify, if you are getting paid to be a lobbyist, you do have to register. You can't just
Yeah,
be,
you have to sign up.
yeah. But if you are just as like a concerned citizen or a constituent who wants to talk more, you can just go and make appointments and all this stuff, right?
One last thing, let me say, not only can you participate, but you are part of the team because you bring the information. Nobody who works up there has more than like half of an aide. I mean, where do you think they get their information when they're working on these bills? They get it from lobbyists like us.
Well, thank you. I'm going to stop recording now.